What are buffs? You hear people talk about them all the time, but what really are they and how do they work? Today, I want to explore and explain the world of Elden Ring buffs, and debuffs too. Buffs can be basically explained as temporary effects applied to an entity that increase their stats. I say an entity rather than a player, as some enemies can also buff themselves, but maybe we'll talk about that some other time. The first basic thing you need to know about buffs is that there's two kinds of buffs, permanent buffs and temporary buffs. Permanent buffs are things like talismans, and they appear up here as squares rather than diamonds. We aren't going to be talking about those much as they're pretty straightforward. Rather, we're going to be discussing temporary buffs, which are much more complicated. Within temporary buffs, there are different categories, and the rule of thumb is that you can only have one of each category active at any given time. There are a total of 8 or 9 categories of temporary buffs depending on who you ask, but really only 4 that actually matter, and they are weapon buffs, body buffs, aura buffs, and unique buffs. Weapon buffs increase the damage done by your weapon, or can add a status effect. Weapon buffs include greases, sorceries, and incantations, and weapon skills. Weapon buffs can be kind of tricky as they can only be applied to certain weapons, and the most basic way to understand this is that if a weapon is upgraded with somber smithing stones, then it likely can't receive a weapon buff, unless their skill involves a weapon buff such as the Moonlight Greatsword. Some of the best weapon buffs include Rot Grease, Black Flame Blade, and Royal Knight's Resolve. Remember though, you can only have one weapon buff, so say you want more damage, then you can introduce a different category of buffs, such as body buffs. Body buffs increase damage done and reduce damage taken overall. They are most often granted by either consuming an item or casting an incantation on your body, hence body buffs. Some of the best body buffs include Exalted Flesh, Blood Boil Aromatic, and Flame Grant Me Strength. Body buffs are an individual way to buff yourself, but what if say you are playing with friends and you wanted to share the love? Well, you should grab for an aura buff. Aura buffs also increase damage done and reduce damage taken, but uniquely affect all players or spirits within a certain range. Some of the best aura buffs include Golden Vow, Rallying Standard, and my favorite, the War Cry of Stormhawk Dean. Aura buffs overall are the most reusable, but as normal you can only pick one. But that isn't the case with our last category, which are unique buffs. Unique buffs, as I said before, are non-exclusive, and you can use as many as you would like. Some of the best unique buffs include Contagious Fury, Holy Ground, and Oath of Vengeance. The observant among you may have noticed I have yet to mention the Wondrous Flask of Physic, and that's because it's kind of a strange case. The flask itself does nothing, the crystal tears provide the actual effects. Some, like the Green Burst Crystal Tier and the Crimson Burst Crystal Tier, belong to the Stamina Regen and Health Regen categories respectively, which are 2 of the categories that I didn't speak of. But the rest of the Crystal Tiers mostly fall into the Unique Buff category as they won't interfere with any other buffs. With that, we've gone over pretty much everything you need to know about buffs. There's only one thing left to do, and that's to go over debuffs. Debuffs basically are the opposite of buffs, and temporarily reduce a given entity's stats or apply another negative status effect. There are 4 kinds of debuffs: Power Shred, Destined Death, Flash Denial, and Unique, which, like with buffs, only one of each category can be active at any given time, except for unique debuffs. First up are the Power Shred debuffs, which decrease the damage negation and reduce the attack power of the afflicted entity. Some of the best Power Shred debuffs were the Shriek of Milos, Soul Stifler, and Grail's Roar. You may have noticed that I said were, and that's because both Shriek of Milos and Soul Stifler were nerfed, but not intentionally. They both are currently stuck at their PvP values even during PvE. This has left the Shriek of Milos all but useless and Soul Stifler as a shell of its former self, but Grail's Roar is untouched, so there's that. Anyways, moving on, we have a category of more direct debuffs. Destined Death debuffs, which decrease the maximum health and slowly drain the health of an afflicted entity. The best and only Destined Death debuffs are the Destined Death skill and the Black Blade incantation. Next are flask denial debuffs, which restrict NPCs' access to their Flask of Crimson tiers. The best and only flask denial debuffs are the Albinauric Pot and the Angel Wings Ash of War. Finally, we have the unique debuffs, which are kind of all over the place. Some of the best unique debuffs include Knowledge Above All, Blade of Death, and the Oil Pots. And yes, if you're wondering, Blade of Death does stack with the Destined Death debuffs, and no, I do not know why they're not in the same category. That's all, folks. Every single category of buff and debuff summarized and explained, with even some bad opinions thrown in. I really don't know why I'm making this video, it kinda just came to me, but if you'd like to see more like it, then let me know. Finally, I thank you for watching and wish you a great rest of your day. Peace.